Hey YouTube, how's it going? Kevin Clear here with a knife video for you. This is the follow-up to the overview video I did. This is the Viper Maga. Now, just so you know, this knife, of course, was a gift from my wife and children, and I have had their initials engraved right here on the blade. I don't know if you can see that now, but you probably will when we zoom in and do a little bit of a close-up on the blade. I've been interested in this knife for some time, and so my wife said, hey, I'm definitely getting you a knife for your birthday. Any suggestions? And I gave her, 4 suggestions maybe, and this one was among them. And she picked this one as she said, hey, this is the one I think I'm going to get you. And I did give her a little further direction on the finish. The carbon fiber was kind of her idea. I would have been equally happy with either the carbon fiber or the micarta, but I definitely wanted the stonewash finish with either one. But in addition, by the way, to those 2 handle options, there's also a wood option. But yeah, definitely I was interested in the carbon fiber or micarta. Now, so that's how I kind of ended up getting this knife. It was a gift. I've known about it for some time after the Edge Observer did a review on, I want to say the Viper Rhino or maybe the Start. But there are a couple other Viper knives and they're pretty good knives as far as I can tell. I've watched a few reviews on other models and they look like a pretty good company. And certainly my experience with this one is very positive. You got high-end materials, good fit and finish, everything's well put together, very comfortable, well thought out. So if you're just watching this for a couple minutes to see whether I think you want to pick one up, I do recommend this knife. If you want to see more detail, go ahead and keep watching, because the next thing we're going to do is size and weight. And I will zoom in just a little bit for that because I want you to be able to see the knife well. So there you go. You have here a 3 5/8 inch blade, a 4 7/8 inch handle. Now the overall length is 8 1/4. And I know you're going, wait a second, those don't add up. That's because when you measure this, you have to measure from the highest point on the handle to get blade length. And then you want the longest blade handle length. But if you take a close look at this knife, you see how that's going to create a bit of a triangle. And so this measurement is going to be slightly different than these 2 measurements added up because there's an angle involved here. So overall, I mean, if you just take this and set it down and use like a straight edge to get your measurements, you end up with a 4 3/4 inch handle and a 3 1/2 inch blade. But the reality is, if someone were to measure, let's say you lived in a state where a certain blade length was allowable, they're going to measure from the top of the highest point on the handle to the tip of the blade. So that's how I measure, and that's what I came up with. All right, so those are your numbers, and I know there's a little bit of variation. So again, 8 1/4 inches overall, 3 1/2 inch and 4 3/4 inch, sort of. Reality is more like 3 5/8 and 4 7/8. By the way, the cutting edge on this is very long. You've got a good efficient use of blade here, and so you've got a full 3 3/4 inches of cutting edge, which I really like. And all of that is weighing in at 5.2 ounces, which is very comfortable for EDC. And I have carried this a lot, and 5 ounces could maybe be a little heavy for dress pants, but I've carried it as sort of a church knife. I think it's as sort of a dress knife, carbon fiber and N690 steel. I mean, come on. So I have carried it as sort of a dressier blade a lot and had no issues with the weight or anything like that, even in dress pants. By way of comparison, I've got a couple of knives here that I think are similar in size. In fact, this one's the exact same size. Here's the Para 2 alongside the Viper Maga. And I want you to see this because I think on video the Maga looks a little bigger than it is in reality. So there it is beside the Para 2. Do one other comparison with the Blur here. By the way, I love the Kershaw Blur, great EDC knife. But anyway, there you can see the 2 of those together. You see the Blur is smaller, of course. And so that's your size and weight. Let's zoom in one more time to talk about the blade on this knife. Sorry. We'll talk about that when we get to deployment. It is more push button than light switch for sure. Okay, so there is your 3 1/2 or 3 5/8 inch blade. It is N690. I'm going to call this, it's very similar to, there's a couple other blades out there that are doing something like this. This is one of the better executed ones I'm going to suggest. The other, of course, is the Saw Kiku, which is a favorite of mine. And then there's the Browning Pandemonium. It has a blade shape that's something like this. It's sort of a modified Tanto recurve blade shape. And it's actually, you know, despite the fact, one, it looks very interesting. Visually, it's a really appealing blade shape. But in addition to that, it's also very functional. What I will say is they perform more like a drop point than they do like a Tanto, okay? If this was sort of a normal American Tanto blade shape, the secondary point here would be up here, and you could use it for a lot of utility tasks. With this blade shape, you essentially have this whole portion of the blade functioning like a drop point, okay? Or even a spear point. If you go like this, you can see, sorry about that, you can see spear point, sort of modified drop point, and then when you see the whole thing, you realize, oh no, it's a Tanto. But it's going to perform in cutting tasks more like a drop point because of the fact that this secondary point is way back here. As you also know, we've pointed out in other videos that the more traditional version of a Tanto knife is with this secondary point way back. In fact, it would be even further back than this. And I would suggest, you know, take a look at the Otanashi no Ken video. So, very cool blade shape. These are flat grinds. The recurve is very handy for all that kind of close kind of carving, whittling work. And then the angle of this knife makes it very comfortable. And I want you to notice what happens when, okay, if you're cutting on a surface, you're going to go like this, and now you got the blade in contact with the surface. But watch where my thumb is. So here, if I'm cutting this way, my thumb is back here. Here's the distance between the cutting edge here and my thumb. Now, if I'm cutting on a surface and I angle the knife up like that, notice what happens. Now my thumb is right here, which means I'm pushing almost directly down on what I'm cutting. So the blade shape is really well suited to a lot of cutting tasks. And it looks, you know, you can kind of look at a blade shape like this and go, yeah, I don't know, it looks really weird. Can it do anything? And the reality is the functionality of this blade shape is actually very, very good. The edge geometry is quite good. This is a fairly thick, I don't know, moderately thick, let's say that. Moderately thick blade, but the point is quite acute, both in this terminating sort of grind here, as well as the tip itself. So that means if you're doing any kind of cutting close to the end of the blade, you don't have a lot of material. If I'm cutting, let's say, cheese, as an example of something that would be hung up and you want a thinner blade, I would cut out here. And you can use that blade in different locations depending on what you're cutting, which is kind of nice. Of course, it's marketed as a tactical blade, and certainly it's going to have that capability. You notice that the point ends up with a very good line in terms of where forces are going to be applied for thrusting, but it also is very well suited to reverse grip. That angle ends up moving the cutting edge out close to your fingers, so there's not a lot of reach. You get a lot of reach without a lot of really awkward arm movement, and it's very comfortable. By the way, when I get to the handle, we'll mention how, you know, changing grips on this thing works. Okay, and the purpose for there's a little divot in the handle that you can see. Now, hopefully I've been in focus. I know I've been moving around a lot. I'll try to quit doing that. Let's finish a little bit with the blade. This blade, one of the things about it is it's fairly well executed, but it does try to do everything, and trying to do everything can be a little dangerous. So we're kind of moving into deployment, but we're still talking about blade shape. So you do have a flipper, which becomes a finger choil, but you also have these thumb grooves here, and you have this little hook here, which makes it a waved knife as well. And this knife waves exceptionally easily, so easily in fact, that it can be hard to get this knife out of your pocket without opening it. Which you may want to be aware of if you're going to carry this somewhere where you don't want to be flipping your blade out aggressively, and then you try to get it out of your pocket and it pops open. Not a good situation, if you're talking to a police officer and they ask to see the weapon in your pocket. But that said, even though it does try to do everything, so you've got a flipper mechanism, you've got thumb deployment, and you've got a wave feature, it actually pulls it off pretty well. Aesthetically, this blade still looks pretty cool, and the addition of the wave feature and the thumb grooves really aesthetically looks nice. and doesn't take much away from, in fact, I don't think it takes anything away from the look of the knife, and it definitely adds to the ergonomics as the wave feature becomes an excellent thumb rest. Now there's no jimping here, and maybe this is one case where I agree with Nut and Fancy. Normally, you know, I like his reviews, but I kind of take them with a grain of salt. Here I would like to see some jimping on this, what becomes a thumb ramp would be really, really nice to see there. Okay, moving on to deployment, which we've kind of already begun talking about. You've already seen the flipper, you've already seen the wave feature. Oh, by the way, I should point out that N690 is a very, very high-end steel. Edge retention is fantastic. No complaints at all. It's going to perform really, really well. And Viper seems very good at putting this steel together. This steel has performed for me well, very, very well. So let's get to deployment next. So deployment is via either the thumb grooves that you can see here cut into the handle. They work very, very well. There you go. Via flipper. Now, by the way, flipping this knife works well if you push button it. Watch as I try to light switch it. Well, it still works. Okay. The odd time when you try to light switch it, it will fail. It's more reliable as a push button, okay? You'll just have to take my word for it, because whatever you try to demonstrate on camera just isn't going to work. See if I can get it to fail. That kind of failed, but that was... There you go. All right, so that's how that works. Oh, you should be able to see the initials there, NJA, Nancy, Joel, and Asher, because this was a gift. Now, you also have the wave feature, and as I said, it works very well. Let's move past that into the actual pivot here. The pivot is a ball bearing pivot system, and it is smooth as silk. I would say this knife is at least on par, and maybe better than any of my blades. I would say the top sort of 4 or 5 are this knife, the ZT 0560, the CRKT Fossil, the CRKT Racer, and I would say, oh yeah, the Southern. You know, a lot of those knives, those are all very smooth. This one is at least as smooth as any one of those, and maybe a little better than most of them. Okay, so very, very smooth pivot. Now I will say it came in desperate need of oil. When I first got it, took it out of the box and I was playing with it, I was flipping a little bit and there was this weird sound. So I started listening closely and kind of doing this type of thing, and I was actually hearing the ball bearings rolling. And so I put a drop of oil in both sides, and then it was like quiet as a mouse and even smoother than it already was. So a little drop of oil made all the difference in the world, and you may find that on a lot of your blades as well. A drop of oil can really make a big difference in the functioning of a blade. So that's deployment, very good. All the methods of deployment work very well and are very well executed. Sometimes when you get a knife that's trying to do everything, it does one well. Let's say you know, it flips really well, but the thumb studs are not great. Any way you try to deploy it, it works really well every time. So I can't complain about any of the deployment methods on this blade. Now, the handle is one of the things, of course, that I really like. It is carbon fiber. You can take a look at it there. Hopefully I'm getting the light properly so you can see it well. Very, very comfortable. Now, of course, carbon fiber is smooth. You know, if you were going to use this for some kind of tactical purpose, I hate that word tactical, but since it's common vernacular, but if you're going to put this into a combat setting, you'd probably want to go with the micarta. That was not my purpose, and it still isn't. This is more of a dress knife for me, kind of a high-end gentleman's folder or a high-end carry. And so the carbon fiber works really well. My wife also preferred the carbon fiber, and she said that makes it into more of a gift than into just an everyday carry knife. And I agree with her. Does look very, very sharp. It's very comfortable. This handle is extremely ergonomic. I pointed that out when I was demonstrating cutting before. It's very comfortable. The only thing that some people may not like, and I've had a couple people say, I hate the pocket clip on that. No, I actually kind of like the pocket clip. I feel like in a knife where you've done so many other things different, if you just did a plain ordinary pocket clip, people might be like, I don't know, man, you did all this work and thinking out the rest of the knife, what's up with the plain Jane pocket clip? This clip is not plain Jane. It does line up exactly with, so on this side, you can see you can move the clip. It's tip up, right or left side carry. And the way the clip is designed is so that it lands on this little divot. Now the divot serves very well to rotate the blade, okay? So when I'm moving this from standard to reverse grip, that little divot in the blade does its job and works very well right here. When the pocket clip, though, is over that, it also does its job and allows for material to kind of move under the clip and up into the spot where you want it. And it's a nice low ride clip, and it's very, very, very well done. One of the better ones that I've seen. It's extremely well executed just because of the way all the materials kind of match up. It seems like there's been some thought that has gone into where this clip was going to be and how it was going to be pulled off. So very well done. There is one little chance here, and notice how the clip comes up fairly high. Now that's really nice if you're wearing jeans or any kind of thick material, but like any other clip that's like that, whether it be the Fossil or I don't know, lots of knives that we could reference, you may catch that on something and bend it. Okay, be aware of that. You should be aware, you know, I think all of us who've carried a pocket knife on any kind of regular basis have had that experience. So there you go. Overall, I am extremely impressed with this knife. It's super comfortable, very nice to carry, very high end, great looking blade in terms of, you know, for a collection. And this is a knife where, if you want me to comment, you know, I wanted to comment kind of in closing on philosophy of use. Oh, by the way, I didn't talk about the liner. The liner is very well, the lockup is really good. It's a little thin. That's the only thing I would say about the liner. It could be a little thicker, but it's not the end of the world. So let's get into, you know, in closing, sort of my thoughts on who might like this knife. I would think definitely it's a higher end knife. The price point is up there a little bit. Certainly in micarta, it would be, you know, more of a combat ready blade. In the carbon fiber or the wood, I would call it more of a gentleman's folder or a high-end EDC knife. The blade finish, I'd say, would affect that as well. If you went with satin or stonewash like I did, you know, you're going to move more toward a higher end, nicer blade, and you could also do like the DLC or the serrations, and again, change the sort of the philosophy of use with the finishes you choose. And I think that's true of almost any knife. You know, the Spyderco Military, I don't own one, but it's a pretty well combat purpose knife, okay? But if you buy the titanium Military, you're not buying it to go into combat. You know, it's a high-end carry knife now. It's a collector's piece now. And I would say that about this knife as well. Depending on what variation you choose, you're kind of, you know, designating it for a certain purpose. Okay, but very comfortable, very useful. I'm super proud of this blade. I probably won't carry it a lot just because it's so pretty, but I definitely will carry it and get a lot of enjoyment out of doing that. Not only that, I can imagine I'll be flipping it and holding onto it and fondling it, as Nothing Fancy says, a whole lot. So that's my take on the Viper Maga. Really cool blade. Thanks for watching, and I'll talk to you later.